Today, we'll be talking about one of Marvel Comics' most well-known vampires, and not that vampire. This one actually dates back to the early 1970s when the Comics Code Authority relaxed a ban that prevented vampires from being depicted in Well, okay, technically that is true, but really that's just an interpretation of the literary character. So, no, that's not right either. See, this one was actually featured in the 1990s animated Spider-Man series for more than 2 episodes. Oh, come on! We're talking about Morbius. Morbius the Living Vampire debuted in 1971 thanks in part to the aforementioned Comics Code Authority. Called the Living Vampire due to being more of a bat-human hybrid, though not to be confused with some other company's bat-human hybrid, rather than the classic depiction of a vampire. Morbius does have the vampire bloodlust and much of the strengths of vampires without any of their weaknesses, such as garlic, crucifixes, holy water, and sunlight. Though he does have an aversion to sunlight, it's not really fatal. In 2013, Morbius the Living Vampire received his own ongoing comic book series. Now, this thing spun out of a Spider-Man storyline that was running at the time called Dying Wish. And we will be touching on aspects of that story later, but for now I should point out that technically the Morbius series begins in Amazing Spider-Man 699.1. And sorry, I really have no time to go into what exactly a .1 issue is. A riot and attempted escape is happening at the superhuman penitentiary known as the Raft. Amongst the attempted escapees is Michael Morbius. As he makes his way through the halls, Morbius bumps into an old running buddy, the Lizard. I'm sure most of you are aware of the origin of Curt Connors, aka the Lizard. He injected himself with a serum composing of irradiated reptilian DNA in an attempt to grow back a severed arm. Now, the arm did grow back. Unfortunately, a side effect of the serum rendered Connors a human-lizard hybrid. Now, Spider-Man was able to reverse the effects of the serum, but not permanently, and to this day, the lizard and human aspects of Connor's personality remain in a constant struggle. The Lizard poses a question to Morbius. Even if the vampire manages to escape, where would he go? Who would take him in? This causes Morbius to flash back to his youth in Greece. Diagnosed with a rare and eventually fatal blood condition at a very young age, Michael Morbius' mother forbid him to leave the house and play with the other children. However, one night, Michael sneaked out with a boy named Emil, and while trying to walk along the top of a wall, Michael slipped and gravely injured himself. As Michael recovered, Emil never left his bedside and vowed to one day cure Michael's disease. Years later, both Emil and Michael became respected scientists who made strides in the field of hematology. Their most recent experiments appear to be having a positive effect on Michael's disease. However, they were still in the animal testing stages. Eventually, Emil managed to secure funding to begin experimentation on human subjects. Unfortunately, Michael's disease had progressed to the point that he could no longer hold a teacup without it shattering his hand. Michael demanded that the formula be tested on him, and Emil reluctantly agreed. Michael was injected with a serum derived from vampire bat DNA and then bathed in low-level radiation. Michael's condition began to improve, but then something went wrong. Morbius broke free and attacked Emil, tearing out his throat and draining him of his blood. After realizing what he had done, Morbius left Greece, never to return. Morbius would eventually make his way to the United States, where he would meet up with Spider-Man. Okay, a bit of an explanation here. The character of Michael Morbius debuted in the middle of a 3-part storyline in the Spider-Man comics, where Spidey had entered another one of his "I just want to be ordinary Peter Parker" funks, so he ingested a formula that he thought would remove his spider-like abilities. In reality, though, the formula backfired, and Peter Parker wound up growing 2 additional sets of arms. Returning to the present, Morbius vows once more to try to cure his condition, and leaves the raft. Morbius makes his way to Long Island, where he's recognized by a man named Justin, who finds him a new set of clothes and advises Morbius to stay out of Manhattan due to an abundance of superhero activity. Instead, Justin recommends that Morbius head to Brownsville, a part of Long Island so riddled with crime that even superheroes avoid it. Morbius takes Justin's advice and heads to Brownsville. Over the next 4 nights, Morbius spends most of his time sleeping in an alley and getting beaten up for not having a wallet to steal. He then eavesdrops on a conversation between a local gang leader named Noah St. Germain and a woman named Wanda over Wanda's son, and as it turns out, Noah's nephew. Morbius tries to intervene on Wanda's behalf, only for her to shut him down and Noah to sick his thugs on the living vampire. The gang chases Morbius down into a subway tunnel and begins shooting him. Due to bullets not exactly being a threat to vampires, Morbius plays dead until the thugs leave. When he comes to, he finds himself under the watchful eye of a street artist named Becky. Becky takes Morbius to the abandoned movie theater where she squats and the two bond. It turns out that Becky is the babysitter for Wanda's son Henry. She brings Morbius along to her job, only to discover upon arrival that Henry ran off with Noah and his gang. Becky and Morbius track down the location of Noah, Henry, and the gang. The two barge into the place and try to talk Noah out of recruiting Henry. When Becky and Morbius try to leave with Henry, a fight breaks out, and Noah thinks he has the upper hand until Morbius gives in to his bloodlust and rips Noah's throat out. Becky manages to run off with Henry as the rest of Noah's gang opens fire on Morbius. Eventually, Noah's girlfriend, named Rochelle, shoots Morbius through his throat, and this incapacitates Morbius long enough for the gang to turn their focus on getting Noah some medical attention. When he comes to, Morbius points out that he's technically a doctor and can help save Noah. Rochelle informs Morbius that he'd better save Noah or else Becky, Henry, and Wanda will be killed. Rochelle points out that while Noah is by no means a good person, he was the only guy in town who managed to keep the other organized crime organizations out of town. If he dies, there will be a power vacuum and Brownsville will become a war zone. Morbius begins working with Vasquez, the gang's one-armed field medic, to try and stabilize Noah. They briefly stabilize him, only for Noah to spring up and kill Vasquez. Morbius tries to calm Noah down, but it doesn't work, and Noah dies. We get a brief glimpse into Noah St. Germain's past when he was a small-time hood named David Brill. On this day, he was approached by a car where he was abducted by a masked woman named Chandra and her unseen employer for some type of experimentation. These experiments resulted in Noah gaining new strength, which allowed him to get where he is. Or should I say, was. Back to the present, Rochelle moves to kill Morbius in revenge for Noah's death, but before that can happen, several individuals in masks similar to the one Chandra was wearing bust in and open fire. As Morbius and Rochelle try to fight off a few of them, some of the other masked men make off with Noah's body. Meanwhile, Becky and Wanda manage to fend off one of Rochelle's goons who was attempting to kill the two. It's at this point that Becky points out that Morbius is a vampire. Meanwhile, Chandra gets in contact with her employer to inform her that they have Noah's body. The employer is pleased. He didn't want to risk an autopsy revealing anything. He then turns to Justin, the man from earlier who directed Morbius to Brownsville. He thanks Justin for his efforts. It turns out the man wanted Morbius in Brownsville in order to best execute his plan. He then turns and kills Justin. The Rose does not want to leave any evidence behind. The Rose is a criminal persona adopted by Richard Fisk in an attempt to subvert and take over the criminal empire of his father, Wilson Fisk, who you know best as the Kingpin. Richard tried on several occasions to conquer his father's empire, failing each time, and ultimately he wound up being killed by his mother, Vanessa Fisk. So, obviously, this is a different person behind the Rose's mask. Sometime later, Rochelle tries to broker an agreement between her gang and the New Jersey Maggia. This is interrupted when the Maggia leader is shot down by one of the Rose's minions. Believing this to be a trap, both gangs open fire on one another, and this is when Morbius enters the fray. We then flash back to just after Noah's death and the immediate fallout. Morbius runs into Becky and tries to apologize for the night's event, but Becky is having none of it and begins trying to talk up Morbius as the hero Brownsville needs. This has led a group of citizen fighters into joining Morbius and taking down the organized crime in Brownsville. Returning to inside the building, we see Morbius feeding on both the gang and the Maggia. He then reveals that he saved Rochelle for last. Afterwards, Morbius exits the building and begins addressing the citizen army. He explains that he's not really a leader, and really only they, the people, can truly affect any change in Brownsville. This is interrupted by a noise from within the building, and Morbius rushes inside to find the Rose taking out a few stragglers. The Rose explains that he is the one behind both Noah and Morbius arriving in Brownsville. He tells Morbius to be Brownsville's beacon of hope until 8 weeks from now, when something catastrophic will happen. At this point, the Rose will step in and take over. The Rose then explains that he has Morbius' mother hostage, even giving him her wedding band as a reminder, so not to try anything. The Rose then leaves. Almost 8 weeks later, and Morbius continues his work as Brownsville's resident crime fighter, with Becky acting as his sidekick, though he does not refer to her as such. He then receives an unrequested assist from the superior Spider-Man. In issue number 600 of The Amazing Spider-Man, Spidey took on his longtime foe, Dr. Octopus. It was revealed in the story that Doc Ock was in the latter stages of CTE, and as a result, his body was dying. Then, during the Dying Wish storyline that the Morbius comic is spun off from, it was revealed that Dr. Octopus had somehow managed to switch minds with Peter Parker and was now in control of Spider-Man's body. At the end of the story, Peter Parker was able to transfer many of his memories into Doc Ock's mind shortly before the body of Dr. Octopus died, though Doc Ock's personality would still be in control of Peter Parker's body. Affected deeply by Parker's memories, Dr. Octopus resolved to become a superior Spider-Man and actually try to do some good in the world. Spider-Man brings Morbius back to the latter's former employer, Horizon Labs, where it turns out a break-in has occurred and most of the stolen merchandise has connections to Morbius. In exchange for cataloging the stolen goods, Horizon will try to reverse engineer the formula that caused Morbius' condition and thus maybe find a cure. Spider-Man and Morbius begin looking through some of the missing merchandise locations when suddenly hundreds of Spider-Man spider bots attack, and this is coupled with Spider-Man's spider senses going haywire. It turns out the burglar, one Nicoletta Harrow, has returned to the scene of the crime. Nicoletta makes quick work of Morbius and Spider-Man, and it later is revealed that she is under the employ of the Rose, and what she's been stealing are the materials needed to make an ultimate nullifier. The ultimate nullifier is perhaps the most powerful weapon in the Marvel Universe. It's usually used in an attempt to take out Galactus, Devourer of Worlds. Now, in the comic, they keep referring to what the Rose is trying to have constructed as low-level ultimate nullifiers, which leads me to believe that the people behind this comic don't know what the term ultimate means. Spider-Man and Morbius set about trying to track down Nicoletta's teleportation signature. Morbius then reworks a device meant to dampen Spider-Man's spider sense so that Harrow won't be able to control the spider-bots. The two manage to locate Nicoletta and begin trying to take her out. Unfortunately, without his spider sense, Spider-Man is taken down rather quickly. Harrow then reveals to Morbius this was all part of the plan. Morbius then looks up to see an explosion as the ultimate nullifier is set off. The Rose sits back and admires the work at what he's done from a helicopter. Meanwhile, Morbius emerges from the wreckage and finds Becky looking for him. Blaming himself for the attack, Morbius advises Becky to leave Brownsville before getting hurt or even killed. Becky, once again, is having none of it. She tells Morbius that he has helped people and managed to restore some hope to Brownsville. Becky and Morbius then go visit Wanda to inform her of everything that's been leading up to this. They then set about formulating a plan. Back with the Rose, he continues to admire his handiwork as he sets off another nullifier. It's then that he notices the streets are completely empty. There's no rioting, no looting, no screaming, or anything. It seems as if the entire population has vanished. In reality, Morbius has taken a large group of Brownsville citizens to the underground city of Monstropolis. Monstropolis, or the Monster Metropolis, is the home base of a group known as the Legion of Monsters, of which Morbius used to be a member of. Other noteworthy members of the group include Ghost Rider, Man-Thing, Jack Russell, aka the Werewolf by Night, Amphibian, a Creature of the Black Lagoon-esque character, and Nkantu, the Living Mummy. Morbius returns to Brownsville and confronts the Rose. The two begin fighting, and this is witnessed by Becky, who secretly followed Morbius along with Amphibian. Eventually, the Rose pulls out another nullifier and blasts Morbius. Morbius falls over the ledge of a building as Becky rushes out to save him. Amphibian pulls her back, pointing out that the only thing that's likely to happen is her being killed as well. Turns out that Morbius isn't dead, and he manages to track down the Rose's location. Okay, the criminal actually blabbed the location of his hideout as he left, but Morbius makes quick work of the Rose's underlings and then faces the Rose one final time. It's then that Morbius points out that he knows the Rose doesn't have his mother hostage. Michael was present for his mother's funeral. The Rose's real employers knew this and used the wannabe crime lord as a puppet. With that, Morbius rips out the Rose's throat. Morbius then picks up the Rose's phone and begins talking to the Rose's employer. He had actually interrupted a phone call between the two when he entered the room. The employer points out that there's more Roses where that came from, so this really isn't that big a loss. Also, this whole Brownsville thing was really just an elaborate urban gentrification plot. Jumping ahead one year, Becky is being interviewed about a recent art gallery display of her work depicting the people of Brownsville. As she leaves the gallery, Morbius is waiting for her outside. He's finally realized that it's time to start living. And so concludes the first trade paperback of Morbius the Living Vampire. How was it? Well, for the most part, the storyline, while not entirely original, is told pretty well. In particular, I think the characterization of both Morbius and Becky is very enjoyable. The artwork, again, for the first part of the story, is very good. Unfortunately, for the second part of the story, dealing with the Ultimate Nullifier, they switched artists, and as a result, it starts to look rather smudgy. Also, for some bizarre reason, most of these stories are told in flashback when they really don't need to be told in flashback. Also, I don't buy the Rose as a very credible threat. It might have actually been cooler had they just revived Richard Fisk back from the dead. I mean, it's comic books. It has happened before. And because of that, I can't say I entirely hate this comic, but I really can't recommend it either. I'm going to have to give Morbius the Living Vampire a D. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.